Welcome back. We're here to introduce our last presenter of the day, Matthew Lemmond.
Yeah. Matthew is a visiting assistant professor of motion graphics at the School of Art, Design, and Art History at the University of Tulsa. His courses cover motion, animation, interaction, branding, illustration, and UI and UX. Additionally, Matthew believes that the concept of play is fundamental to learning, so many of his projects involve gaming. Additionally, Matthew earned his Master's of Graphic Design from North Carolina State University. His research interest is reducing psychological distress in cancer patients with embodied conceptual metaphors in a serious VR game. And we'll take it away to Matthew.
Okay, am I on? All right. So I'm sure it's been a really long day, a lot of great, exciting, inspirational things, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about my research. So I've got some VR videos here, and I'm sure any of you that have played VR, you know how it's not real, right? We've all done it. We know it's not real. These people know it's not real, but it feels real in that moment based on the quality of the graphics and the sound. And even sometimes some of them involve vibrations, and a really small amount involve smell. But yeah, we see people just very physically reacting to what they see in virtual reality. And so this is part of my interests here. Let's see, here we go. So I've got a little question here. Why do VR games produce physical and emotional reactions? That's going to be part of what we're talking about today. So one possible answer would be the idea of embodiment. Our interactions with physical things shape how we communicate, think, and feel. And so you might ask, but wait, VR games are fake, right? Yes, but through well-designed sight and sound, VR feels real. I play a VR game that's golfing, and there's a little ridge that if the ball, when you mini golf and the ball gets stuck right up against the rail, that's a hard ball to hit, and you have to separate it when you're physically playing mini golf. But in the game, you can just swing right through the wall. But I find myself stepping over the wall and lining up my shot, even though I know that's not real. And the better and better the graphics get, the better that we're gonna feel like that moment is real. And look up you can look up any VR reaction videos. There's the plank one, I'm forgetting the name now, but you go up a really tall skyscraper and you walk out into a plank and you jump off like you're soaring through the air and you're about to hit the ground. It feels emotional. Even though you're standing on the ground, it feels like you're falling. And I think that is something that people can use for good. And I think that that's something that people can use for bad, that emotion. And I would like to talk to you about how we could use it for good. Additionally, VR feels somewhat real through touch because of the controller vibrations. And then lastly, for a select few, VR feels real because of a fragrance device that produces a smell. And of course, with the idea of smell comes taste. That's a really select few of experimental VR games. But for example, if you're a cancer patient and you're stuck in a bed and you cannot move because of whatever ails you, they can come on and pop on a VR headset. And then, so you've got the sight and sound and a little bit of feel. And then they'll have, imagine you're in a depressing hospital room where there's beeping coming from down the hall. You can pop on your VR headset and be on a beautiful beach in Hawaii, let's say. And then somebody can activate the scent smell, and then you get a little bit of, barbecue or something like that. That is a really powerful thing that we have at our fingertips, and it's becoming more and more affordable. VR reinvents itself probably every 6 months. And so one of my former professors was talking to a guy that wrote the VR book, and he's like, how how do you keep up with this? And basically the answer is like, well, we don't. Like once we publish it, it's already a little bit behind, but we just keep publishing. So my name is Matthew Lemmond. I'm a visiting assistant professor of motion graphics here at the University of Tulsa. And I want to talk to you a little bit more about VR. So the name of my paper and my research is Helping Cancer Patients Reduce Psychological Distress with Embodied Conceptual Metaphors in a Serious VR Game. And if that doesn't sound too annoyingly academic, I have a longer research question that I'll read to you here in a little bit. But let's break this down. But before I do that, I should say I presented this at the East Coast Gaming Conference in Raleigh, North Carolina a couple years ago, as well as at my grad school alma mater, North Carolina State. And both were really exciting opportunities. But let's get back to this breaking down the terms. So when I talk about serious games, a serious game is any game designed for purposes other than pure entertainment. Like for example, there are VR games that can help you with like dexterity and to regain mobility. There are VR games. Have you ever heard of phantom limb pain? Like maybe you've lost an arm or a leg and your body is telling you, like for example, like say I didn't have my left hand and my body was telling me your left hand is on fire right now. Some people experience that, and you can use virtual reality through therapy to try to fix that, whatever is happening in their brain. And what you do is you recreate a situation where they can see their left hand and they realize it's not on fire, and then like over time, and I'm giving you a very bird's eye view of it, but over time it's supposed to help. In the 2015, I think it was 2015 FIFA World Cup, there was a young man that they had believed was paralyzed from the waist down for a long time. And through a robotic exoskeleton that they put on him, he simulated walking every day. His body would just move lifelessly with this robot, his lower half. And they would play virtual reality of him walking. And over time, they discovered that the nerves weren't completely dead. Like that's pretty exciting. And he actually went and kicked out the first kick at the Rio FIFA games whenever, I think it was 15, 14, something like that. You can look it up on YouTube. But yeah, it's VR has this really interesting ability to move us into places that we haven't been able to go with all kinds of things. It's used in counseling with vets that have experienced really bad things and they don't want to talk to anybody. So through virtual reality, it's like a form of therapy for them. But it's specific, like it's specifically designed for the purpose of therapy or rehabilitating your limbs, or like what we're going to talk about, like reducing psychological distress in cancer patients. But it's even used with burn victims. So there is a lot of like cool things happening out there in VR, not to mention the other cool things of just like playing a game and having a lightsaber battle with Darth Vader, and you can see your hands as you're fighting him. Anyways, so yeah. A serious VR game is any game designed for a purpose other than pure entertainment. So what does embodied mean? Like I said earlier, our interaction with physical things shape how we communicate, think, and feel. And then if we talk about conceptual metaphor, this goes back to Lakoff and Johnson's research into metaphor. And conceptual metaphor theory posits that our brains map the source and target domains of an entity or action to understand the world better. And this isn't something that, I just realized I'm skipping over my notes. This isn't something that, for a long time, people thought metaphor was just this like flourish that you would put onto your language, like something fancy to do. And it's not. It's fundamental to how we think and how we talk. So if I say I'm feeling good, or I'm feeling up, or let's say I say I'm feeling down, those are both metaphorical things because I'm not physically moving up or down. And if I say, you know, it's a really dark film, that doesn't mean that it's poorly lit, right? I mean, it could be. It could be. But what it means is that there's lots of negative, like, unpleasant things happening in it. So we use metaphor just constantly in how we think and how we talk. So with conceptual metaphor theory, you might have seen this before. It's the most popular metaphor for cancer is war, military fight, something like that. So we take something that we know, like a fight, a war, a battle, and we apply it to something that we don't really know, like cancer. Even the smartest people in the world don't really fully understand why cancer does what it does. So anyways, so in conceptual metaphor theory, we take something that we know to understand something that we don't know. And for people that are really stressed out and making really life-changing choices quickly, it is helpful to use metaphorical language to help them understand. So let's talk about cancer-related psychological distress. That's defined as negative emotions that impede everyday activities. So, so here's that question again. Helping cancer or not question, but this is the topic. Helping cancer patients reduce psychological distress with embodied conceptual metaphors in a serious VR game. But let's talk a little bit more about those cancer patients, because you know the first step of design thinking, the first two steps of design thinking are empathy and definition. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about empathy right now for the cancer patients that we're designing things for. And by the way, these VR games for cancer patients go back to 1999, and I'm gonna talk about that a little bit more. But it was the VR headsets that weren't 360 or 180. It was just kind of like having a cell phone screen in front of your face. But yeah, they've been used for a really long time with cancer patients in therapy. So this isn't like something that's new. And in fact, I think it has a lot of potential for growth if you consider that 38.4% of people in the US will receive a cancer diagnosis in their lifetime. That's a bunch. I didn't expect that much. So perhaps you'll find this surprising, or perhaps you can relate. But so those facing a life-threatening illness are likely to experience what is known as psychological distress, or like I'm saying, cancer-related psychological distress. Fear, PTSD, anxiety, warped sense of self and circumstances, discouragement and depression. Those facing a life-threatening illness, or I've already read this, but some other bits about psychological distress that's pretty concerning. 45% of survivors, these are survivors, not people currently going through it, but after they've survived it, experience anxiety. 25% of survivors experience depression. Depressed survivors are 2 times as likely to die prematurely. And suicide is 2 times as likely for survivors. So I think that we not only have the 38.4%, but then we have all the survivors that we could think about. So I think that there's like a legitimate demand and history for this segment. I don't want to call them a market because I don't want to talk about like selling things to them, but I would like to talk about making things to help them. Our mental activity affects our behavior, and our behavior can affect, and this is starting to get a little bit into the what classic medicine would consider questionable. This is an area of debate in medicine. How much does our brains does our psychology impact our physiology? And as this information is growing, there's more and more evidence that says these are related and we should treat them together. So some of the ways that how your brain works that can impact cancer is that it can impact the speed at which cancer grows in some forms. It can affect your immune system's response to cancer. The rate of cancer mutation through the discharge of stress hormones, and the cell's ability to self-destruct, which is called apoptosis. There is a growing body of evidence that says we need to think a lot about this as we're thinking about cancers spreading throughout the body. So let me catch up with my notes real quick. Okay, so while the I'll read this quote from the National Cancer Institute. The National Cancer Institute acknowledges that experimental research suggests a tumor's ability to grow and spread can be encouraged by psychological stress. So they are reluctant to say that, but because right before this, they say that there is no evidence that successful management of psychological stress improves cancer survival. But they do acknowledge that there is this experimental research that is suggesting psychological stress definitely has a role to play in this. And I think that we should create things to reduce that psychological distress. So but let's back up for a second and look like big picture. Like I talked about apoptosis, like the cell has 3 kill switches that it goes through when there's something bad like cancer happening in the cell, and cancer bypasses all of those. And we don't know why. I think that there's varying degrees as to like what we think, but we don't really know why. And cancer is, at least in part, an unknown entity beyond the understanding of even our greatest minds, and it's buried in the essential elements of our biology. And here's my submission to everybody that it takes a team to fight this cancer. And as a result, we must fight it with a broad range of experts beyond traditional medicine, which includes computer simulation and gaming designers. Fearing the unknown future is a source of distress for cancer patients. And of course, there are other sources of distress, like the cost of the treatment and unwelcome changes to your body. That's a big one. And it definitely explains some of the distress that happens to survivors. And having to make immediate decisions that have lasting consequences, to name a few. But all of these point back to the fear of cancer and its unknown consequences of the future. So in concert with treatment, counseling, family support, metaphor are one solution to the problem of cancer-related psychological distress. Metaphor helps patients make sense of their past, present, and future experiences with cancer. And again, we see that conceptual metaphor theory matchup of cancer is a fight. Again, fight is something that we understand. Cancer is something that we don't really understand. And especially if you're new to all of this and you're not somebody in the medical field, like metaphors can really help somebody understand what's happening. And let's see, as Kermeyer Mayer puts it, an academic who studies metaphor and medicine, healing may occur because the metaphorization of distress gives the person room to maneuver imaginative possibilities, behavioral options, and rhetorical supply. I don't know about you, but that sounds like a game to me. metaphorization of distress. You can design the enemy. Room to maneuver. You can move around the game. Imaginative possibilities, right? Like, what if I could fly away from my cancer? What if I could obliterate it with a gun? And then rhetorical supply. Like, so it gives me words to describe what I'm feeling, which is often a thing that cancer patients talk about as a point of stress, is that they can't describe what's happening because it's complicated. And like I said, some of our brightest minds really don't understand what's happening. So our minds are truly powerful, and traditional medicine is changing to include how our minds impact our body. So again, how does metaphor relate to gaming? I would say that games are metaphorical because the user plays as a character and gains their abilities. So games are metaphorical. And anyways, let's see. Yeah. Okay. So my investigation has identified these 7 values of metaphor for cancer patients: shielding, playful, communal, bodily experience, educational, control, a new perspective. So, for example, like shielding, I might not want to say that that I'm dying of cancer to my family. Like, that might be too emotional. But I could say I'm going to walk into the sunset soon. You know, like, I could use that metaphorical language to separate. Or I could say something like, I don't really understand what's happening, and a doctor could say educationally, you know, cancer cells, they kind of, you know what zombies are? Like, cancer cells, regular cells are like humans, and then cancer cells are kind of like zombies. They're this like broken version of a human that just consumes and consumes and consumes and consumes. So you can use, like, obviously they aren't zombies, right? The cancer cells aren't zombies. But you can use this language to help people understand. And with understanding can bring some peace of mind. And imagine if you were in a 360 virtual environment that supported all of this while you were getting treated for cancer. There's, like I said, there's already research that goes back to 1999 that supports all of this. But again, I would say these type of words, these sound like games. These sound like virtual environments, giving me control, giving me a new perspective. Virtual reality is a completely new perspective. I can be underwater, like grabbing at fish, or I could be on a spaceship fighting Darth Vader. You know, like it gives very new perspectives, and it's completely surrounded. So, let's see. Okay, so virtual reality, it can visualize abstract ideas, it can visualize metaphors. It provides alternative metaphors. So a part of a therapy could be, oh wow, this patient has developed a really unhealthy metaphor to describe the situation. Let's create a dosage of such and such VR games that will hopefully change the way that they're thinking. This is already happening with virtual reality, and like there, I believe it's University of Southern Florida is doing this, lots of like deep gaming research and imagining what would it look like if instead of a pill, I gave you 3 games to play for the next 3 months, you know? Like that I believe this is part of our future in the next 20 years. So VR can help distance patients from cancer. So like I said, imagine that patient that's sitting in a bed and they can hardly get out and they feel awful, and everywhere they look, they're reminded of how awful they feel. But what if they could pop on a VR headset and then like go to Jupiter and, you know, like fly around or whatever? Like that's some really helpful mental things that can happen there. So virtual reality can also help to regain mental control over cancer. So it won't be a physical control, but it will be mentally a sense of control, like a sense of empowerment. So let's see. Okay, so now I'd like to talk to you a little bit about a game called Chemo.
And one of the things I love about you, and you're here today, we're on a show called The Doctors, obviously. Yes. I want you to tell us a little bit about, you had a
Here we
personal
go.
experience really close to you with cancer.
I did, and I'm really happy to be here with Estellas and talking about cancer care and how technology is helping with cancer care. My mom passed away from ovarian cancer about 9 years ago, and actually that's why I did Dancing with the Stars. When she was ill, you go through the phase when you have somebody who's affected with cancer. First you figure, especially somebody with my means, we're going to fix it, no problem. And then you realize we may not be able to fix it, and then you focus on cancer care and patient care. And my mom was in the hospital for a while at the end, and every Monday we'd go there with the other ladies and we'd watch Dancing with the Stars. And this is way before I was on Shark Tank. I used to do the Canadian version of the show, and my mom would watch, the beautiful dancers and that life as an immigrant that she could never have. And she'd say, "Oh, one day, you think you'll be on Dancing with Stars." And I'd be like, "Oh, Mom, I'll never be famous enough or on TV in the States." And the show meant so much to her. So when they asked me to do it, we did it right away. I did it right away for my mom.
Incredible. So now tell us about your partnership.
Here's where it's supposed to start.
And during that phase, it was amazing to me how little technology had caught up to patient care and cancer care. And Estellas has this program called the C3 Prize that they launched in order to encourage, kind of like a mini Shark Tank, but companies that deal with patient care and to make people's lives easier. And the product ended up winning, used virtual reality to really use therapy to make people calmer when they go through that. Because the testing is really stressful, and going through cancer is really stressful, especially if you're a child.
And you mentioned the winner. We actually have the creator of the winning product here with us today, Ju-Won Kim from On Comfort. Welcome to the show, and welcome. How is the product impacting patient care?
I think it's definitely impacting them in a way that we use non-pharmacological solution to help them reduce anxiety and pain. And it helps the hospitals as well because it helps them, the patients to recover quicker so they can leave and go home.
And we have a prop over there, Dr.
Yes, we do, and I get to be the tester here.
Is he always the tester?
No,
Yes, he is. He is.
when it came to dancing with your wife, I was the tester. That was a good gig.
I know where you live.
Wow. This is just so mesmerizing what I'm looking at in 3D. You just want to keep looking at what's around you and all these what are these things that are coming towards me? These like little bugs, insects, and very three-dimensional.
Well, those are the bad blood cells, and so it's a
Okay, I can see that.
Yeah, it's a completely immersive game, and you can't you kill the bad blood
Okay, I
cells.
get it.
So
Am I
it's
inside like a vein or artery?
Probably.
You are.
That's
Could
what
be.
it looks like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I love these innovative concepts. They're necessary in medicine. I applaud you for this because it really is so very important. And Robert, I would say to you, keep up the great work.
Thank you. I think that it really helps a lot of people recover.
Well, appreciate you being here today, Robert. Real pleasure. Shark Tank.
Okay. So, chemo there, and do you notice what he said? Like, he's a very rich person, and he thought, we have the means to fix this, and he realized he doesn't. He realized, like, all the money in the world can't help sometimes. So, when he was talking about his mother. So, like, this is really a problem that it leaves even the richest people, like, just kind of stuck sometimes. So we need a bigger team of people around it, other than traditional forms of medicine. Chemo by On Comfort is likely the only metaphorical VR game that is designed for reducing distress in cancer patients. So there are a lot of VR games that are used with cancer patients that I'll talk about, but this is one that's like specifically metaphorical. And you saw the designs. It's not very impressive. I don't know what they did with the $50,000, but like I'm sure that y'all could make something way better. And yeah, they won this humongous prize. So I think that there's a lot of potential out there for maybe it's not cancer for you, but it could be burn victims. It could be a lot of things, but there is a potential out there to incorporate gaming and medicine. And my next step with this research would be to find someone to fund it, kind of like they did with the Australis. Yeah. Another thing I wanted to point out is that it was geared towards kids, but that makes up like 4% of the cancer population. You really need to be thinking about like people over 37 years old in design, because it's just such a tiny section of the population that they're designing towards. And you know, they also have a really cool game that before kids have to do a painful procedure, like say a serious back shot or something like that, they'll pop on the VR headset and they have to slow down their breathing. And the faster they breathe, the game reacts to their biofeedback. So like if they're nervous, the lights will start moving and characters will start running around. But the more they calm down, the more that they breathe slowly, the more the game calms down. So it's like a visual feedback to what our body's doing. And to me, that's really interesting therapy. And they're finding that they don't have to put them under anesthesia with these games, which is, anesthesia is dangerous, like for anybody. There is a lot of growth here. But basically in the game, it's a first-person shooter that that teaches adolescent patients about chemotherapy. You shoot the green cancers, you don't shoot the blue good cells. And then you fly through this like futuristic, spacey-looking blood vein. Okay, so this lady, according to Dr. Susan Schneider, an associate professor at Duke University School of Nursing and an oncology nurse with 30 years of experience, by decreasing chemotherapy-related symptoms like anxiety, virtual reality has the potential to increase compliance with treatment, affect survival, and enhance quality of life. So she's written 9 articles on this, and she is the matriarch, the first one to do it in 1999. And honestly, like she would have, if the technology was there, she would be a much bigger name, but it just was like incredibly expensive to use at that time. But now, like we can pop our phones into a Google Cardboard and have this experience. So she was a little bit before her time. But I want to point out for a second, affect survival. Like that's a big claim, especially if we consider what the National Cancer Institute is saying. So like I said, she's written 9 articles back to 99. In an interview with Schneider, she described to me that VR headsets are like horse blinders because they block out all of the visual stressors. And I'm not a big advocate of people checking out mentally with video games, but I certainly am if you have some kind of like stressful event in your life, check out. Big time. And this is what virtual reality headsets do, unlike any other gaming experience, is you completely block out what's happening. So if I'm in a room of 30 people all receiving chemo, I don't have to look at them. I can go look at fish in like the Mediterranean. You know what I mean? Like, it's very therapeutic. She also told me, this is interesting, patients don't read. Like when you're receiving your chemotherapy for 2 to 3 to 4 to 8 hours, like their reading is too taxing for them. So it calls for a distraction that's a little more passive, a little more just experiential, which again fits really well into virtual reality, or can fit in well. She isn't alone in this thought. In 2006, a mini review examined the use of VR with 839 patients and concluded that VR improves patients' emotional well-being and diminishes cancer-related psychological distress. So, for those that might not know, a mini review summarizes a large group of peer-reviewed papers. This one looked at 19 individual peer-reviewed articles on the subject. Interestingly, the mini review makes no mention of what the viewer sees. To me, that's a humongous oversight. If this is supposed to be a therapy to help you, you need to be talking about what they're seeing and hearing, and they weren't at all in the mini review. It's like the whole thing, like it's the whole VR thing. Let's see. And only a few of the individual articles thoughtfully examined what the users see in VR. One of the 19 did intentionally design a game, and the game was walking through the forest. And so they did talk about what they were trying to communicate visually. But it's like a large oversight by both the medical community and the people developing these games to just say like, meh, we're not gonna care about what they see. Like, so some of the articles didn't even mention the name of the VR game. So I couldn't look up anything. One individual article included the name of a VR game, but gave no description. After further research, I discovered that what cancer patients were seeing, the game that they were playing was described as a horror mystery game with like dead children and ghosts. I don't know how that passes IRB. I don't know how that was a good idea for anybody to choose. And by the way, IRB, Internal Review Board, like if you're in academia and you want to test something with users, you have to go through IRB. So for example, they wouldn't let Susan do any shooting games because they were like, nope, that's violent, not doing that. But somehow this horror mystery game got through because nobody looked into it because they weren't caring. So to me, I would describe this as a big oversight, and I'm sure that you agree with me. Missing from all of this research is a critical evaluation of the qualities of visual, auditory, and interactive stimuli. This was another really informative article by Haro. It's Seeing is Believing and Believing is Seeing. This peer-reviewed investigation that explored the mental images patients have about their cancer via art materials. This was all with like breast cancer survivors, and they would make really interesting shapes. So this article had a big influence on my concepts that I'm going to show you in a second. But missing from this research is a critical evaluation of the patient's source of distress, the source of comfort, the metaphors they use to describe their experience with cancer, and how they can inform the plot and entities of a serious VR game. So, so here is my, actually, let me see. Okay, yeah. So here is my, I remember we started off with kind of the complicated title that I described in detail. This is my official research question. How can the design of a serious VR game use multimodal metaphors to transform a patient's embodied metaphorical conceptualization of their cancer from a negative source of anxiety and depression to a positive opportunity for personal growth? So that's, instead of explaining all that, I'm going to show you some of the stuff that I've made. One more quick stop. We don't have to read through this too much, but this was a kind of like systematic breakdown. I read through a peer-reviewed article that interviewed three women who currently had cancer and how they would describe their experience with cancer. And some of them, it was their second time. But through considering what caused them distress, what gave them comfort, game plot implications, metaphors they use, like for example, treatment is jail. Medical staff is like a rugby team. So that's like a really common one that, because they feel like, you know, these older people feel like, I really need somebody bigger and stronger and faster to come help me. So one of the patients described the medical staff as a rugby team. They aren't, right? But like, it is really helpful for her to think that they are. Like, because she's putting the kind of physical skills and muscles that you might identify with a rugby player, she's using that visually to understand their mental ability to combat cancer. So for her, it was a comforting thing. One patient described herself as tough as a leather boot. She bragged about how the only child that she ever had was when London was, the only child that she had in the hospital. I think she was a mother of 7. The only child that she ever had in the hospital was when the Nazis were bombing London. So like she's from England. So like these metaphors they use are really important to understand. Okay, so one of them described cancer as a punishment. Like that's unhealthy thinking, and we need to be able to correct that with therapies like this. So this led me to a couple conclusions. And what this would be is kind of a paper to hand off to a developer that wanted to build this. This would be like, hey, here's where you're starting. And at some point, you know, I might just fully build it out. But for now, you'll see some of my examples. So let's just take a look at this, and then I am done after this. So here we go.
Helping cancer patients reduce psychological distress with embodied conceptual metaphors in a serious VR game. How might cancer be metaphorically represented in a virtual environment? Cancer is more warm and dark than cool and light. Cancer is more round than angular. Cancer is more irregular than regular. Cancer is more appendaged than unappendaged. Cancer is more soft than hard. And finally, cancer is more small than large.
Will the treatment work?
Did I do something to deserve
Will
this?
I live long? Why did I get
Will the cancer come back?
Why me?
Fearing the unknown is a source of psychological distress for cancer patients. Concept 1, breaking out of the hospital and into nature. In Concept 1, the patient is in a familiar hospital setting that is dark and depressing. This concept embodies the experience of the user as a powerful entity that can move freely. Concept 2 and 3, cancer as an obstacle the patient can control, and patient as caregiver. This concept explores the metaphor cancer is an obstacle on life's journey. Here the user finds that a cancer-like obstacle is blocking the flow of water, consequently making the river stagnant. The user can remove the obstacle, thus restoring order to their virtual world.
Okay, so those are my concepts, and with that, I would like to welcome any discussion or questions that you might have. We've got about 15 minutes. Or I could play the video again if it'd be helpful to see that. Or we could just be done. Yeah.
So with the benefits that have already been studied with virtual reality, how much do you think is somebody in their experience, and how much of it is the game aspect of directed intention, goals, and incentivized action?
Okay, so you're asking me how much is it just them being like how much is it them being in a different environment, and how much of it is the how it's built? Is that?
So like when I think of a game has actions that are incentivized.
Mm-hmm.
VR is unique in games in that it can very much recontextualize and enforce almost completely its own context.
Mm-hmm.
Removing you from whatever context that you were in before. I guess my question is, in your intuition, is the power of VR specifically in that new context enforcement, or is it in pieces of the games of the action incentivized actions to direct thought and that way?
Yeah. Okay. So it is it the real value in VR? Is it that you are taken to another place, or is it how the parts of the game are built to tell stories and incentivize actions? I think it goes back to what Susan said, just the horse blinders. Like, it just takes you to a different place. However, by the way that it's built, it can feel more real or less real. So like as image qualities get better and better and better, and we're able to, like make it accessible for people who wear glasses, and able to make it accessible for people who can't hear, and the more and more that the technology advances, I think that will become an equal part of the horse blinders, like that, because it'll support that story. So like virtual reality has a really magical way of suspending our belief. Like we know that we're not in a different location, but gosh, it really feels like it. And the better the technology gets, and the better the storytelling gets. Like for example, I have an Oculus, and I have to like click on the ground to fast forward to where I want to walk to, and that really kind of takes you out of the moment. But the more advanced systems that you can walk around a little bit, then those start feeling real. So I think the stronger component is the horse blinders, but I think that that is changing, or it's becoming equal, I guess. But yeah, any other thoughts or questions? Yeah.
You talked a lot about this being used for cancer patients.
Mm-hmm.
And cancer treatment. What ways do you see it being used outside of that?
Yeah.
To treat other sorts of things that would be psychologically stressing.
Yeah, so it's used with veterans to be able to, for one, like just to have somebody to talk to. Like they don't do well. The University of Southern California is doing a lot of this, where they find that they don't want to talk to counselors, so they put a virtual counselor in there, and then it's kind of not really a game; it's a simulation, but it is used in that way to help. There's a game called, I believe it's called Snow World, that's used with burn victims to metaphorically describe what's happening with them, and they get to instead of looking down at their burnt skin when they're playing a video game, they get to look down at their virtual arm, and it is it's not burnt, and they're moving around. And for example, one of my professors at NC State created a game, I Am a Man, going back to the Memphis sanitation workers that were protesting for fair wages, and in the 60s, right when MLK was shot, and he has this VR experience, and it's emotional. Like, so you're acting as you are one of the protesters, just walking along a line protesting, wanting fair pay, and then a police officer pulls you over, points a gun, and says, "Put your hands up." And you look down at your hands, and I had a black man's hands, and I had never experienced that before emotionally. And it was like, whoa, like, So it can be really helpful for empathy, you know, and understanding other people's situations. There's a bunch of others, but yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
I might have missed this, but do you think this will become more and more mainstream as it develops?
I don't know. I don't know if, is my mic still on? Okay. I don't know. I think that like what needs to happen is people need to keep buying all of the like high dollar games so that there can be more funding there to pursue these side projects. I think like serious games are never going to be as popular as other games. Well, maybe, I don't know. Maybe they could be. But yeah, I think that it's always going to be a niche thing. But I do see it growing a lot in the next, 30, 40 years or so to become kind of like an alternative to medicine, alternative to all kinds of things. But yeah, any other thoughts or questions? If not, I really appreciate the time. Thank you very much. Yeah.